Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a deeply tragic and disturbing case that has haunted many for years, the murder of 10-year-old Imani Moss in Lawrenceville, Georgia in 2013. This horrific crime, committed by her stepmother, not only highlights the brutality of child abuse, but also the grave failings within the child protective system. Let's delve into the details and understand the full scope of this heartbreaking story. Imani Gabrielle Moss was a bright and beautiful 10-year-old girl living in Lawrenceville, Georgia. Born on April 23, 2003, Imani's early years were marked by joy and potential. She had an infectious smile that could light up any room, and her lively spirit made her a beloved figure in her community and school. Imani was known for her kindness and her love for learning. Her teachers often praised her for being a diligent student, and she had dreams of becoming a doctor one day. Her peers loved playing with her during recess, and she was often seen as the glue that held her group of friends together. Imani's early life, however, was not without challenges. Her biological mother struggled with substance abuse issues, which eventually led to Imani being placed in the custody of her father, Emani Moss. Despite the family struggles, Imani's father initially provided a stable and loving environment for her. They shared a close bond, often spending weekends at the park or watching movies together. Imani loved drawing and would often present her father with colorful, imaginative pictures, which she proudly displayed around their home. However, Imani's life took a dark turn when her father married Tiffany Moss in 2009. At first, Tiffany appeared to be a positive addition to their small family. She was a preschool teacher, which seemed like a perfect fit given Imani's young age. Initially, Tiffany's presence brought a sense of hope that Imani would have a maternal figure who could provide additional care and support. Unfortunately, this hope was short lived. Tiffany's entrance into Imani's life marked the beginning of a series of abuses that would ultimately lead to Imani's tragic death. It started subtly, with Tiffany showing signs of jealousy and resentment towards Imani. Small things that children do, like spilling a drink or leaving toys out, were met with disproportionate anger from Tiffany. Over time, these minor incidents escalated into severe physical and emotional abuse. Friends and neighbors noticed changes in Imani. She became quieter, more withdrawn, and her once bright demeanor started to fade. Imani's teachers were some of the first to notice the troubling signs. She began to show up at school with bruises and signs of neglect. The teachers, deeply concerned for her well being, reported their observations to the Department of Family and Children's Services (DFCS). Despite these reports, the system failed to protect Imani, allowing the abuse to continue unchecked. The situation at home deteriorated rapidly. Tiffany's abuse grew more frequent and severe. Imani was often denied food, locked in her room for extended periods, and subjected to harsh physical punishment. The joyful child who once dreamed of becoming a doctor was slowly being broken by the relentless abuse she faced daily. Despite the warnings and clear signs of abuse, Amani's cries for help went unheard by the authorities. The DFCS was inundated with high caseloads and lacked sufficient training and oversight, leading to critical oversights in Imani's case. Her biological mother, despite her own struggles, expressed deep concerns about her daughter's well-being to anyone who would listen. She feared for Imani's safety, but her warnings were also ignored. Imani's father, Emani Moss, who once provided a loving home, became complicit in the abuse, whether out of fear of Tiffany or a misguided attempt to maintain the semblance of a family. He failed to protect his daughter from the escalating violence. This negligence and betrayal by her father added another layer of tragedy to Imani's story. The loving bond they once shared was shattered, leaving Imani isolated and vulnerable. The stark contrast between Imani's early years filled with potential and her final days of suffering highlights the deep tragedy of her life. The system designed to protect children failed her, and those closest to her betrayed her trust. Amani's story is not just one of personal loss, but also a profound indictment of the systemic failures that allowed such a tragedy to occur. Her life, which began with so much promise, ended in unimaginable pain and suffering, a stark reminder of the urgent need for reform in child protective services. By delving deeper into the background of Emani Moss, we gain a fuller understanding of the precious life that was lost and the devastating impact of abuse and systemic failure. Imani's story should serve as a powerful call to action to ensure that no child suffers the same fate. Reports of abuse began to surface in 2010, just a year after Tiffany Moss entered Imani's life. Imani's teachers noticed bruises and signs of neglect, prompting them to report their concerns to the Department of Family and Children's Services (DFCS). Despite these reports, the system failed to protect Imani. Tiffany was charged with first-degree child cruelty in 2010 after admitting to beating Imani with a belt. She received 5 years probation, but Imani remained in the household where the abuse continued. Imani's biological mother, who had lost custody due to substance abuse issues, expressed concerns about her daughter's well-being. Despite these warnings, Imani was left in the care of her father and stepmother, setting the stage for the horrors that would follow. This negligence by the authorities is absolutely infuriating. The system that should have been her safeguard instead turned a blind eye. On October 24, 2013, the brutality reached its peak. Tiffany Moss starved Imani over a period of several weeks, reducing her to a frail and weakened state. The autopsy later revealed that Imani weighed just 32 pounds at the time of her death, less than half the normal weight for a girl her age. Can you even imagine the level of suffering she endured during those weeks? The hunger, the pain, the feeling of being utterly abandoned by those who were supposed to love and protect her. On the night of October 24th, Amani succumbed to the severe malnutrition and abuse she had endured. In a desperate attempt to cover up the crime, Amani's father, Emani Moss, and Tiffany decided to dispose of her body. They placed Imani's lifeless body in a trash can and attempted to set it on fire in a wooded area near their apartment complex. This act of trying to destroy her remains is not only gruesome but shows a complete lack of humanity. Emani Moss called 911, claiming that he had found his daughter dead. When authorities arrived, they discovered Imani's charred remains in the trash can. The gruesome scene shocked the responding officers and initiated a criminal investigation that would unveil the horrifying details of Imani's final days. Following the discovery of Imani's body, both Iman and Tiffany Moss were arrested and charged with her murder. During the investigation, Iman Moss confessed to his role in the crime and provided detailed accounts of the abuse and the attempts to dispose of the body. He pleaded guilty to felony murder, cruelty to children, and concealing a death, and was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Tiffany Moss's trial garnered significant media attention. In a move that shocked many, she chose to represent herself in court. The trial revealed the extent of her cruelty and the systematic abuse she inflicted on Imani. The evidence presented included heart-wrenching testimonies, autopsy reports, and the chilling details of Imani's starvation and neglect. In 2019, Tiffany Moss was found guilty of all charges, including malice murder, felony murder, and first-degree cruelty to children. She was sentenced to death, making her one of the few women on death row in Georgia. Her decision to represent herself in court almost feels like an attempt to control the narrative, to somehow maintain a sense of power over a situation where she had lost all moral ground. Imani's death brought to light the severe shortcomings of the child protective system in Georgia. Despite multiple reports and clear signs of abuse, DFCS failed to take decisive action to remove Imani from the abusive household. This failure prompted widespread public outcry and demands for accountability and reform within the child welfare system. Investigations into DFCS revealed systemic issues, including high caseloads, insufficient training for caseworkers, and inadequate oversight. These problems contributed to the inability of the system to protect vulnerable children like Imani. In response to the public outcry, Georgia lawmakers and child advocacy groups pushed for significant reforms to improve the efficiency and effectiveness of child protective services. The murder of Emani Moss is a tragic example of how the failure of child protective services can lead to devastating consequences. Imani's death was not just the result of her stepmother's brutality, but also the systemic failures that allowed the abuse to continue unchecked. The warning signs were there, and yet the system designed to protect children failed her at every turn. In my opinion, this case underscores the urgent need for comprehensive reform in the child welfare system. Caseworkers need proper training and manageable caseloads to ensure they can adequately protect children. Additionally, there must be strict oversight and accountability to prevent such failures from recurring. Let's talk about this for a moment. How many more children need to suffer before we take real, meaningful action? We have to ask ourselves, what kind of society are we if we cannot protect our most vulnerable? We need to hold those in power accountable and demand better standards and practices. It's frustrating to see these stories come to light only after a child has suffered immensely or, worse, lost their life. Imani's story should serve as a wake-up call for society. We must prioritize the safety and well-being of children and ensure that those in positions of authority are equipped to act decisively to protect them. It's not enough to mourn the loss of Emani. We must commit to making the necessary changes to prevent such tragedies in the future. This means supporting legislation that funds child protective services adequately and ensuring that there is transparency and accountability at all levels. Reflecting on this case, I can't help but think about my own experiences and the importance of a supportive and protective environment for children. Growing up, I had people around me who I knew would fight tooth and nail for my safety and well-being. Imani didn't have that. She had a system that failed her and guardians who betrayed her. It's stories like Imani's that remind me why we need to be vigilant and proactive in our communities. If you suspect a child is being abused or neglected, speak up, report it. It's better to be wrong than to stay silent and be complicit in a child's suffering. We all have a responsibility to look out for the children around us. The heartbreaking murder of Emani Moss is a stark reminder of the potential for brutality in cases of child abuse and the critical need for systemic reform. As we remember Imani, let us also commit to advocating for better protections for all children, ensuring that no child suffers the way she did. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into the tragic story of Imani Moss. If you found this video informative, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated on our latest content. We are committed to bringing you the real stories behind the headlines. Stay safe and see you next time.